and welcome. I'm Megan Isidore. I'm the co-founder and director of River Otter Ecology Project. We're so happy to be here in Arizona partnering with Friends of the Verde River. Your work, the Verde folks, is really inspiring, and we're hoping that adding otter spotting to your programs is going to help further your conservation goals. And before we get started on our program, I'm going to pass it over to Nancy Steele, Friends of the Verde's director, to get us started.
Thanks a bunch, Megan. Let's see. Should I go ahead and...
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Just a couple of quick slides to orient everybody. You know Friends of the Verde River, or maybe you don't, but we're an organization headquartered in Arizona, in Cottonwood actually, that works collaboratively for a healthy flowing Verde River. And we are here today, and you're here today, because part of a healthy flowing Verde River means that it has healthy populations of important animals and plants. And one of those really important animals is the river otter. And so some of us have seen river otters, maybe most of us, maybe even everybody of us in this webinar. And so what we want to know more about river otters, and we can do that through a community science project, which has been going on, as Megan will talk to you about, for a while in California. So if I could have my next slide. Again, just some orientation. The Verde River Basin, or watershed, is a large body of land in north central Arizona, about 6% of Arizona's land area. And through this watershed, we have flowing one of the last free-flowing rivers in Arizona. And this is a very important river that provides irrigation, water for irrigation, for recreation, for growing crops, and even water supply. It is an important driver of the rural economy in Arizona. And if we go to the next slide, this slide is what I wanted to include this slide on, is to show you that the Verde River has Arizona's only 2 river section federally designated as wild and scenic under the federal law. So it's pretty special, not only to us here in Arizona, but it's special and important as a nationwide river. So when we have this opportunity to learn more about some of our fellow travelers in this watershed, the river otters, we jumped at the chance, and are really happy to have this partnership with the River Otter Ecology Project. So I'll pass it back to Megan.
Thank you so much. Oh. There we go. So thank you very much, Nancy. And there are 3 partners on this project, actually: Friends of the Verde River, River Otter Ecology Project, and also FieldScope. And you'll hear a lot about all 3 of us during the course of this seminar and the next one. Let me start with briefly a little bit about River Otter Ecology Project. We're a grassroots nonprofit, and we use the under-the-radar recovery of river otters in the San Francisco Bay Area to get people excited about our ability to make change during really difficult environmental times, to collect data, to research, educate, and advocate for watersheds. We know how urgent the need to protect our waters and lands is, and this project is part of supporting those protections. So we're going to start today with tracking otters in the Verde, which is what we're all about. And here is an otter in the Verde. This is an otter at Dead Horse Ranch, and we have received only 2 river otter sightings in our Otter Spotter project so far, but we aim to change that. The first thing I want to ask you all to do is actually participate with us in this project and let us know why would we track otters in the Verde? What is important about knowing where the otters are? If you can put your ideas in the chat, it'll really get us all thinking. So if you were me, or if you were you looking for your otters in your local rivers and tributaries, why would you be looking for them? What would you want to know about them? Just throw out any idea. What do you want to know? What are you curious about? What do you wonder about your river, about the presence of otters? Were they always there? I see one new message. Let's see if I can get down there. Indicator of river biodiversity. That's a good one, Joe. Otters must be a high-level predator in the Verde. That is so true. How they survive and what they eat. Yes. When is the best time to see them? Great comment. Yes. And if there are otters, it tells us something about the rest of the ecosystem. Where do they live? So many questions come up. They're rare in Marcia's area. Are they indigenous to the area? What's their behavior? So many questions. And when we started our project, we had all of the same questions, and we still have a lot of them, but we have teased out some of the answers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we do it, what information we collect, why we collect it. But first, let's see a couple more sightings in the Verde. These just came in last week, and I'm really excited and really grateful to Linda for sending them in. Listen. That's a baby. That's a young otter, and that's a contact call. So what do you wonder about this? What does this tell you? What are you thinking? You're getting a little information about their behavior already. You saw what that youngster did when it noticed someone staring. Who is it calling? Is it its mother? Where's mom? That's what that little one is saying. You got it. Exactly. Where's mom? Mom! They are communicating. River otters communicate with each other in many, many ways, and this is one of them. You'll see more about this a little bit later on. Oh, we'll see this again. Look, he notices someone videoing and jumps in really fast. Have they been counted in the Verde? And if so, how many? That is one of our major questions. So here's a map of the Verde, and I really like this map because it's delineated upper, middle, and lower Verde. And I would love for you guys know about the Verde. I don't. I haven't visited the river yet, but I hope to one day. Where in the river do you live or recreate or fish or do anything else? What part of the river are you in? And have you ever seen an otter? I'd love to hear from any of you who have seen an otter. Just put your answers in the chat, if you will. I know Nancy has seen an otter. Oh, Karen has seen 2 otters playing in the water by Tuzagut Bridge. In the middle, Chuck has seen 2 a few years ago. So that's already telling us something, right? There were river otters a few years ago, and we know that there are river otters now. We're getting information already. Oh, someone saw 5 or 6 at Dead Horse. Great. Oops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. Joe, where is Clear Creek Takeout? Is that in the upper, middle, or lower section?
It's in the midsection.
Thank you. So is it everyone's idea that you see them most in the middle section of the Verde? I'm really interested in that because I don't know what the answer is. Camp Verde, that seemed to me likely. lower middle, lower part of the upper section near Cottonwood. I know they're near Cottonwood. So you all already have a lot of information about river otters that you're going to be able to share with us through FieldScope, and we're going to show you exactly how to do it. So I'm really excited already because a lot of you have seen and are seeing otters now. So that's fabulous. Thank you so much for that. What we have so far on our otter spotter map, this is our own map, our River Otter Ecology Project map, and we've been collecting otter sightings since 2012, mostly in California, but in about 2015 or 16 or 17, we started getting more sightings from all over the country, but very, very few from Arizona. And in fact, until last week, we had only received one sighting down here near Phoenix, Scottsdale. It's in blue. It's a little blue dot down there. The yellow dots, like the one up here, are definite sightings. This one we got with a photo. So if we get and a video, in fact, if we get sightings that don't have photos or videos, we call them maybe, probably, possible sightings. But the ones where we have definite documentation, we call sightings, and we make them yellow. So I love the recent sighting that came from Cottonwood. The comment on it was, "Ate my duck," which river otters do, and we'll hear more about what they eat later. But already we're getting an idea, we're getting some information and ideas about how river otters are doing in the Verde, what they're eating, really important to know. So let me go through a little bit about our project and our goals for this particular project now that we've situated ourselves in the Verde. According to the Arizona Game and Fish Department, there was once a population of the Sonoran subspecies of river otter, but they apparently died out when river otters became extinct in Arizona in the 1880s. Now, river otters were reintroduced in the 1980s from Louisiana, so it was not the same Sonoran subspecies that was reintroduced. It was a different subspecies, and they're apparently doing well, but we don't know where exactly they are, how many of them there are, how they're doing. This project is already helping us find out where they are and giving us a hint of whether they're rare or common, whether they move around with the seasons, even some hints about what they're eating over time. Now, our population of river otters in California is their behavior is probably pretty different from yours, mostly because a lot of our river otters are coastal and they do really well living along the coast and in the bays. So I'm excited to learn more about river otters in a very different habitat from the one that we study mostly. Now, FieldScope offers us a platform, a way of collecting participatory community science data, but also making that data for analysis and visualizations. And when I say visualizations, I'm talking about definitely photos and videos, but also graphs and charts and the ability to track change over time, which is what science is all about, really. So when you participate in FieldScope, you're participating in some real science that is usable by not only by us, but also by you and everyone else. So that's what I really love about it. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our project, River Otter Ecology, and how we use Otter Spotter and how we try to make change with our Otter Spotter program. Just like in Arizona, river otters were historically present, and they were all over the San Francisco Bay Area. Their numbers dwindled with pollution and loss of wetlands, like this wetland where these happy little otters are, and also because of trapping. They were absent for decades, and we started our project back in 2012 because we realized river otters were making an under the recovery. Suddenly, these charismatic, gorgeous creatures were being seen in waterways in my county. And officially, they weren't there. Nobody knew they were there. So we started our project to look for otters because the return of the otters, unassisted, they weren't replanted here, they just came back on their own. And their return led us to questions about their recovery and how it might affect our watersheds and what their return and their status can tell us about our shared watersheds. So we now have hints about the answers to those questions, and we've been doing on-the-ground research to find out more answers of to those questions. For example, this little wetland that you just saw those adorable little otters in is in Point Reyes National Seashore. It's a coastal wetland, and it's surrounded by pasture land, which is heavily grazed by cattle. The runoff into some of these really delicate wetlands in the area is heavily polluted with fecal coliforms from the cattle. Now, given that this is a national park, it behooves us to have evidence of management issues that need to be improved. And that's a really important thing that we can do to protect our watersheds. So why otters? What information do we collect and why? Otters are an indicator species, and by indicator species, I mean they're a species that can only survive and thrive in a watershed with specifically fairly decent water. It doesn't have to be pristine. In fact, they can withstand some amount of pollution. The amount isn't really known yet because we don't have all the research in on that. So they indicate a reasonably good watershed. They're making it, as I mentioned, a recovery on their own. We improved conditions in our waterways, and the river otters just came back. They're connectors between urban and wildlands. River otters do not care about living in a city. They think it's fine. As long as they have healthy prey species and reasonable habitat, they show up in San Francisco, they show up in Oakland, in all the big cities surrounding San Francisco Bay. It's really been quite astonishing for us to see them come back. They're also predators. They can affect other species. They eat a lot of food. And when there are other species around them, we want to know what's going on because, of course, a new predator in town can change the balance of the food webs in an ecosystem. So the more we know, the better. They're charismatic. We call them our little charm bombs because they really are. Besides being adorable, cuddly, cute, and fluffy, they're also fierce and brutal predators at times. So the information that we collect is information about where they are, how many of them there are they hit by cars, do they have young, all the things that we've just been talking about, the same questions that you all have. What do they eat? What kinds of endangered species are around them? Knowing the answers to these and other questions help us protect wildlife corridors, mitigate for toxic spills and fires, which of course we're all really under the gun on the fires these days, understand traffic mitigation needs and wildlife crossings, and better manage restoration processes. Now, what I'm showing you here is the range map that was in effect when we began our project in 2012. It had last been updated in 1995. This is the San Francisco, this is the California coast. Here's San Francisco here with the big bay down here. Everything pink here was considered river otter range. Everything not pink was considered empty of river otters since the early 1900s. And we knew that wasn't true. So we started collecting sightings. We did kind of what we're doing here. We got in touch with people, we called people, we got the word out through the media. We did presentations and we asked people to send in their otter sightings. And they started to send them in. And pretty soon, 11 years later, we've had 5,500 sightings from all over the country, but mostly from California and the West Coast. So what do we use these data for? The yellow dots on this map are definitely sightings. The red crosses are dead otters. People mostly see them hit by cars on the road. Unfortunately, otters are small, they're dark, and they get hit by cars all the time. Based on your information and your ideas, put this again in the chat, or you can call it out if you want to. Who in your opinion, who in your area would be interested in where river otters are? What kinds of people? Think about the people that you see out on the river, and think about what you do out on the river, and think about the kinds of people who might want to know where otters are. And this is information for me. I'm part of what I'm doing today is collecting information from you to help me. Ecologists, absolutely, Chuck. Fishers, yep. Hikers, kayakers, game and fish department, other retired walkers, yes. Anyone who loves wildlife. I love that, Karen, that's true. And I was just thinking about some of the non-human persons who might like to know where the otters are. Every species of fish you've got in the river, and I know you have a lot of species. Okay, so that's great. You guys you're doing everything right. You've got all this going on. I'm trying to get to my next slide. There we go. So what do we use these data for? And I'm going to give you a couple of little examples here. We use them to try to support and try to influence conservation decisions. And we are literally led by the otters and the people who care about them. Now, the map on the right is a little bit hard to read, but I'll explain it to you. The green spaces on this map is critical wildlife habitat linkage areas. So all this green starting across these mountains and going through this little corridor where the orange circle is critical wildlife habitat. And this corridor is a crossing by which these animals get not only across this area here, but also look where the rivers go. Up here on the left, there's a big, beautiful wetland where there are tons of otters. Down here is San Francisco Bay. So the rivers that go up and down this area are a corridor. They're a wildlife corridor that's used by otters. And you can see all these orange dots. Those are all otter sightings. So otters are using that area, and Otter Spotter told us that. It's directly connected to what we're able to do when we found out that a development is slated that's going to cut off those areas. It's right here in Glen Ellen where the orange circle is. The development, if they put it in, will cut those off. So one of the things we do is advocate for better conservation decisions. So we comment, we write comment letters, we go to meetings, we talk about the fact that those waterways are important, not just for river otters, but for all of the species that use them to go up and down, and cutting them off is going to be harmful to the life of the river. That's one way of using the information. Here's another one. River otters are becoming very used to people, and they're very urban species, which I'm so happy to say, because we certainly need our urban predators. I love this video because it shows a man doing exactly what he should do by that otter. I don't know if you noticed in the beginning, but he's a fisherman. He's got a fishing pole against the side there. The otter comes up, he keeps the dog on his lap. He doesn't bother the otter, he just hangs out and everything is good. So part of what we do with Otter Spotter is find out where there are hot spots, where otters are being seen a lot in different places, particularly in urban places, because what we want to do is have our trained docents be out there in places where there may be some problems happening with dogs off leash in places they shouldn't be, dogs running on beaches or trails where they're not allowed, chasing the otters, chasing other wildlife. So one of our programs is called Otter Ambassadors, and we send our docents out to give information, not to be police or tell people what to do by any means, but to offer information about photographing and viewing wildlife in a responsible way. So those are just two examples, and I think more examples of what we use Otter Spotter for will come out during the course of our work together. So who else cares about where the otters are? What happened after we had our Otter Spotter project for about 5-6 years, we called up the Department of Fish and Wildlife in California and said, hey, we've got all this data. Can you use it? Do you want to update your map? And lo and behold, they said, yes, we do. So they updated the map, and all the pink is the old otter, range. Here's San Francisco Bay right here again. All of the maroon color is new river otter range as of a couple of years ago when they finished updating the map. So that has added 4,100 square miles of river otter range, which it's easy to say. It sounds great and it's fun to say, but why does that matter? Why do we care so much about where exactly river otter range is, and who cares? So we were just talking about conservation and advocacy, and that's obviously something that's useful to have, especially in an area like San Francisco, like much of California along the coast is very, very built up, very densely populated. It's important to know what species of wildlife we have. Restoration managers, obviously, so much of restoration is geared toward endangered species. So if there are endangered species and there's a predator like a river otter showing up, we want to know where they are. Of course, natural resource managers, naturalists, hiking and kayak leaders, as you all correctly pointed out, local parks people, state, national parks, toxic spill response teams during oil spills or other toxic spills that happen by rail. The people who are responsible for taking care of those spills need to know what species might be affected. Of course, wildlife rehabilitators, teachers. We work with a lot of teachers, and the teachers love to work with otters as a way to get kids excited about science and biology and animal behavior and all those sorts of things. Other researchers, of course, and nature watchers, as you all noticed as well. So we're going to move on now. We've talked about what Otter Spotter does. I want to talk now a little bit about where we might look for otters. I love this video of two otters on a riverside, mother and pup, doing what otters do. And we're moving into talking about where we might find otters, where you might look for otters, and signs of river otters that you might look for that can help you know if there are likely to be otters in the area. A lot of times you just see them. I don't know how shy they are in the Verde. It seems to me like they may not be as shy as I thought they were, since so many of you have seen them. This is really typical mom and pup behavior, hanging out on a gravel bar, being comfortable, happy, grooming each other, playing. Otters are really, really playful. They're among the few species that continue to play throughout their lives. So that's a great video. So you're the experts on the Verde. Where would you look for them? What part of the Verde? What kinds of habitats would you look in? Especially those of you who have seen otters. Has it been vegetated, non-vegetated, secluded, overgrown areas? Yep. Where do you think they'd find more food than other places? Close to riverbanks, grassy areas. Yep. You know, I know you recently had a big flood. You had a big fire recently too, right? Did that take out a lot of, oh, Nancy, wherever there are crayfish, absolutely. Did the fire take out a lot of habitat, do you think? Does anyone know whether the fire took out a lot of vegetated habitat along the river? Not sure. Okay. Confluence with Oak Creek.
So the fire was in Tavashi Marsh. I could actually see it from my house. And it was a pretty big fire. I don't know what caused it. This is Karen. I live in Clarkdale. I was trying to find out what caused it, but I had hiked there about a month before, and the vegetation was really thick, lots of reeds and cattails and that sort of thing. It's a beautiful place, but I haven't been back. I don't know what it looks like now.
Yeah, thank you.
They won't let you back in there, Karen. The overlook was made out of Trex. And so they're still evaluating what the chemical damage happened to the marsh because of burning of the Trex. They probably could have figured it out by now, in my opinion. It's been a couple of weeks. But I don't know if otters were in the marsh. I've never quite heard they were in there. I don't know if it's a big fish habitat. There just seems to be lots of reeds and birds and stuff. Yeah, like I did in my message. Oak Creek, it seems best. Crayfish, fish hatchery, yeah, that's where they are.
For sure, they're definitely at the hatchery. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're going to look at these sightings again in near Cottonwood. What do you notice about this habitat where these little otters are? This is a very typical otter habitat. Deep water, yep. Deep water is good for otters. Why, Chuck? Because that's right, because of fish. River otters love fishing, and deep ponds have more fish. And that's part of why having beavers in areas where they haven't been before and building dams, those behind the dams, pools build up, and that allows more and bigger fish to come in, and that definitely attracts otters as well as many other species. So Joe says protection from predators, yep. So vegetated areas, but I see at the top left, it looks like there's a dock and maybe even a house or a deck out there. So does it have to be entirely pristine with no people? Absolutely not. It's great to look for otters pretty much wherever you are near water, if you know they're there, if you know there are otters in the area. So what about this? Is this a place where you might see otters? This is the hot spring. Sharon, the presence of beavers doesn't deter otters. They in fact, they like to use beaver bank dams as resting places, or even to have pups if the beavers are gone. Chuck, that's where you saw the otters you saw. When I saw this picture, I thought, wow, this looks like otter territory to me. Lots of vegetation, lots of water, lots of places to swim or cross or hide. Really good. Good. It makes me happy that you saw them there. And that sandy bank across there at the end, that would be a favorite place for river otters to roll around, to scent mark, even have a latrine site. Latrine sites are places where all the otters in the area use to poop and pee and scent mark. They're very attuned to scents. So how about this? How about a place like this? Not much vegetation, very rocky. Looks like it would be really hot and dry in the summer. Looks deep. I don't know much about this. I just saw the picture and I thought, there are places where we sometimes haven't expected to see otters, but have seen them, especially along really rocky coastlines where it can be rough, where the waves can be really rough. Otters are really tough. And when I looked at this, I thought, maybe, but what I would do if I were in that kayak where that guy is check out all the low-lying areas and even on top of the higher rocks, like up here, to see if you see signs of otters, otter scat. So we have found some of our best otter study sites by going along in kayaks and just looking with our eyes and with binos. How about this? This is near the bridge. What do you think? What do you think about water like this that's really murky and muddy? Looks good. So if otters are fishing in that water, how can they see? How can they even find fish when it's that dark and murky and maybe turbid? Harder to fish. Yep. The otters have an adaptation that they have a couple of adaptations that allow them to hunt really well in turbid, murky water. One of them is a nictitating membrane. It's almost like having a clear a clear goggle come down over their eyes when they go into the water. So it protects their eyes from murk and they can see reasonably well. But what they have that really helps them find food even more than that is an amazing set of whiskers. Their whiskers are incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for?
Sensitive.
Sensitive, thank you. Their whiskers are very, very sensitive and they can sense movement in the water and go after prey that way. So water like this doesn't bother them at all. They're fine with that. So you all are getting the idea that we can find river otters kind of almost anywhere in the river. So it behooves us all to keep our eyes open all the time. And I'm going to talk about some of the signs that you might see along the river that tell you that there are otters there. And the first thing I'm going to show you is this beautiful otter lying on a bed of reeds. Otters love reeds like this, that they're all flattened down and they can lie in them. They can be kind of protected from people. They can hang out. Like, this is a huge otter. This looks like a male to me. You can kind of tell males from females to some degree because they have a bulkier head and neck than the females. River otters do have sexual dimorphism, meaning they're different, the males and females are different sizes. And the male otters are a little bit bigger in general than the females, but being river otters, there's lots of differences among otters too. So you can't always count on it. It's hard to tell the sex of otters, even when they're lying like this, showing everything. The males generally don't show much in the way of testicles or a penis, and the females, of course, don't have any of that. So it can be really hard. It can be hard to tell the difference. Generally, I know I can tell males just because I've looked at so many otters, and they do have that thick neck like this guy. But if it's a young male, it might not look like this either. It might still be a slender young thing. Anyway, more about all of that later. You can see they have 5 digits on each paw. They have webbed, each of their feet are webbed. And look at the toe pads here. We're going to see those more closely in a minute. So what kinds of places do you think, given what we've talked about otters, where do you think you might find them? Where would you look for tracks or for scat or for even traces of otters? Think of it that otters really need to get between watersheds. And this is the one of the ways that they do, through culverts. So when we're looking for otters, we look around culverts, not necessarily to see otters themselves, but to see signs of them, scat or tracks. So that's one possibility. Let's talk about this for a minute. I would love to know what you guys think about this. What is this that we're looking at? This is along a river near my house. And the flattened space is probably about 2.5, 3 feet by 2 feet. Looks like an otter bed, a place where an animal has bedded down. Yep. Could it be an otter? Could it be somebody else? What do you guys think? How would we figure out whether it was an otter or some other animal lying there? Besides size. I know one time I was looking for an otter latrine site because that's where we set our motion sensitive cameras up. Trail to water, good one, Richard. We always look for that. We look for fur or feathers. Yes, Lisa, absolutely. Entrance to water. Karen, otters like matted down reeds for sure, but they also like other places like this. So I will divulge the secret, and this is indeed an otter bed. And scent, Joe, great answer to that, because scent is really important. Otters are mustelids. They're very sensitive to scent themselves, but they also put out a lot of odor. Their scat smells very musky, very fishy. A lot of times when we're walking along a riverside looking for otters, we smell their scat, and that's how we know where their latrine site is, and that's where we will set up a camera. So Karen, I'm going to get to that very shortly, what their scat looks like. But this is an otter bed. There's a, you can't see it very well in this, but there is a slide that goes down to the water. So you want to look for slides. Narrow, don't forget, otters are really narrow animals. And then if you see a flattened down place like this, look for scat. There's some scat right there, that right here, that little black piece of scat, that's an otter poop. And probably if you got close enough to it, you could smell that scent. It's very strong. As long as it wasn't too old. Once it gets really old, it doesn't smell anymore. Another way to seek otters. Turn up your sound. You hear that scared baby call? You heard that a little earlier, but this is a really scared baby. Those grunting noises are called chuckles. And otters definitely hiss. This poor mangy little fox scared it. So the grunting noise is called a chuckle, Karen, like laughing. Yes, I am part otter now. So otters make all kinds of noises, but the ones that I hear most often when I'm out, especially if I'm kayaking and they're in the water with me or near me, and even if I can't see them, I can hear them doing those little contact chirps that you heard. It sounds a lot like a bird. So we're going to talk briefly, not too long, about tracks and scat, because I don't really expect you to look for tracks in scat, but you may find them. And you may look for them too. Tracking is really difficult. Tracking sign can be difficult, and tracking is really hard. It's hard to interpret. It takes a lot of practice, but Terrence is going to put some sources of tracking information into the chat for you. And I would really recommend checking out beartracker.com. It's run by a woman who's an astonishingly good tracker, and she's also a really good teacher. She's very generous. She has lots of videos about tracking, and I've learned so much from her. She's great. So I'm going to start with otter feet, and I'm going to show you some lots of otter tracks. But let's look at this foot here and get some information about what an otter track might look like. So you can't tell so well on this, but we mentioned before 5 toes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they have claws. All their feet are webbed. So that means, well, you'll see in a minute what that means, but they also have these interesting little round protuberances on their pads of their back feet. And those are scent glands, because as I mentioned, otters are mustelid. They use scent for information. They leave scent for information for other otters, and those are scent glands. Sometimes if you're on a bank and you're looking at otter tracks, you can, if it's a really good track in mud, you can see those scent gland marks. It's really interesting. So here's a little test for you all, but I promise you we're not going to grade it. Whose tracks are these? There's one on the left and one on the right. Put your guesses in the chat, and if you would be kind and put in one reason that you think that's the animal, we'd love to hear that. One on the left, one on the right. So Chuck, which one is that otter web feet? Is that the left one or the right one? Otter on left, says Lisa. Dog or canid on right. Good. Yes, you guys are good. You guys are good. So how did you know the left one was an otter? Webbed feet, someone said already. How many toes? 5 toes, right? So otters, much like humans, have, you can tell if it's the right or the left foot, because much like us, on their left hand, on each foot, actually, they have one toe that's further down and than the other ones. And that's just like ours. That shows it's a left one. So this one, you see this toe is down here. It's a left otter foot. This one is, in fact, oops, a canid. It's a, let's go backwards. That is a coyote track. So I am not great with tracking in particular, but I do know this is a coyote for a couple of reasons. One is that it has 2 little toenails right in the front. 2 is that it's very regular across these 2 and across these 2 toes. And finally, it has a little cross area in between. It can be subtle, it's hard. When you go out tracking, if you're interested in tracking, definitely take out a ruler so you can measure it. That really helps. And if you're taking photos and you're going to send them to someone who's a tracker or show them, don't just take one photo like these. Take a whole series of photos all around the area, because that will help the person that you're asking about the track figure out what it is. So one more track only, and then we're going to move on to scat. But so whose tracks are these? They're both the same animal. Have bear, we have cat. Anybody else have an idea? Where are we seeing claws? We're not seeing claws. I don't see any claws here. How many toes does it have? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I think this is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a bobcat tracks. So they're very small. Again, the ruler helps. It shows how little that track is, and it's in mud, so it's spread out a little more. Those are bobcats, very typical for us to see when we're out. And I'm always amazed at how tiny those little tracks are. And these are otter tracks, yes. But they're not only otter tracks. There's another animal in there. Who knows what that is? And which is which? Okay, you guys are too good. Yep, the one at the top is the raccoon. And the just positive finding is that they don't have the webbed feet. So their fingers show all the way down to the paw. That's very typical of a raccoon, but it's also really easy to confuse raccoon tracks and otter tracks because they have a lot of similarities and we don't always have such a good substrate to look at the tracks. These tracks down here are very, very typical of river otters. They have a teardrop top where you can see the claws really well, and it's in a teardrop shape. So if you see otter tracks, you'll probably say, are they otter tracks? And you'll probably be right, but keep looking. Here's some more in sand. You can see all 5 toes. The one toe is down and offset. You can see that they have webbed feet a little bit. The webbing isn't always clear either. Tracks are really tricky. I'm still, after 11 years, I'm not in every case, I'm not 100% certain if what I'm looking at is otter or raccoon. It can be really hard to tell. Okay, we're going to talk about scat, but not for too long. So whose scat is this? Ideas? Marcia, I'm sure wet sand is rare there, but there's got to be some wet sand somewhere at some time. So this, anybody have any idea what this is? It's hard to tell. We see feathers, we see a few bones. It looks like bones, feathers. It's hard to tell. There's some vegetation in there. More scat. This scat on the left is old. That's why it's all old and white and dry. You can see a few fish scales in there, a few bones. This one is newer. It's dark. It has something wet here on the side. Any idea what these are? Okay, we're going to move on. And then there are these. Let's go back. So these two and this one are all otter scats. And that's because otters eat all kinds of different prey, and therefore their poop can look really different. It can also look really different depending on how old it is too. So just to let you know, and this is the last gross poop slide, I promise. This is not all otter. One of these is otter and one of those is someone else. And it's really, this was one of the hardest things that we had to learn as we were learning. Yes, Karen, the top one is otter scat. And both of these animals have really similar looking scat because they've been eating the same thing. And once again, just like with the tracks, it's river otters and raccoons. They can have very similar scats. The top one is a river otter. And I know it's an otter because, well, if I were looking at it out in the field, I would know it was an otter because I could smell it. And I would know that the bottom one was a raccoon because I could smell it. But the other differences are pretty subtle. The shape of the scat is a little bit different. Raccoons tend to have a more collected pieces of poop than otters, slightly more collected. They're also usually in a latrine site, which is generally in a different place from where otters are, although I have seen them like practically right next to each other, an otter latrine site and a raccoon latrine site. The other thing that I find difficult to understand, or not to understand, but to envision, is that the one on the top, the river otter, the pieces are a little bigger. If you've ever seen river otters crunching crayfish in a creek, they just crunch them and swallow them practically whole. They don't do a whole lot of grinding of them. Raccoons tend to grab their food and kind of grind it up and crunch it up a lot more, so the pieces are smaller. So that's just some information about scat and tracks. This horrible looking thing is called river otter jelly. It's a substance that's made in their intestines. And the thought is that it actually protects their intestines from crab shells, from bones, from the sharp things that they're eating. So the jelly is interesting. We find that it dries up really, really fast. So it kind of dries up and dissipates after a short amount of time. And I'm sure where you live, it would dry even faster. Probably within an hour, it would be pretty much dried up. But we use it because when we're doing genetic work with otter scat, we're looking for really pure examples of scat that aren't filled with prey species like poop is. So this jelly usually only has otter DNA in it. So that's why it's handy for us. So we're going to move on now to animals that might be mistaken for otters. And don't all start laughing at once, because most of you probably know what this is. If you do, put it in the chat. But it's not surprising. We get a lot of photos that come into River Otter Ecology Project through Otter Spotter that are not otters. And the reason for that is not because people are dumb or anything silly like that. It's because they're often seen in dark water. They're often underwater. They're often only seen for a minute, not long enough to get a really good look. And that's why we encourage people to send in a photo or a video, even if it's really bad. It can really help us to tell what animal people are seeing. So someone said beaver, someone said nutria. It's neither of those, but it's close to both of them. It's much, let's says, I didn't put a ruler in here. It's much smaller than a beaver. Muskrat, that's right, Chuck. That's a muskrat. You can tell it's a rodent because it has those orange teeth and it has that clumpy rodent fur. And muskrats are little. They're about 18 inches long. And they have a tail that's really not at all like a beaver tail. It's kind of like a little skinny little whip tail, which is flattened vertically. So that is a muskrat. And we do get an awful lot of muskrat photos. But again, don't ever be afraid to put in or send us a photo if you're not sure what it is, because we actually love to see any animals. We get so many seals from our coasts. We get lots of seal photos and we love to see them. So we can usually figure out what it is. And the good thing is that if we can't figure it out, we'll email you and try to figure out with you. So I think you'll all know what this is immediately. And the reason I put this one in is because a friend of mine said, I can never tell what animal I'm looking at, if it's a beaver or an otter, unless I see it swimming. So here, and I really, when she said that, I thought, oh, of course, if you're not used to looking at the animals, you're not sure what they are. But beavers have this way of swimming that's very forthright, very stolid. They're not agile, they're not graceful. Well, they are actually pretty graceful, but they're not like river otters who are really active and sleep in the water. And that's right. They do have wider bodies than otters. They're much bigger. River otters weigh about 20 pounds. Beavers weigh about 65 pounds. They're big, big animals. So here's our little river otters who weigh about 20-ish pounds. They're very small. when you see a river otter, and I hope you actually won't see this because it's kind of awful, dragging a pelican that it has killed by the head, their heads are about the same size as a pelican head. They're very small, narrow animals, but they can be about 3.5 feet long. They're long, but they're narrow. They're also really, really strong. They have those big bulbous noses. That's typical of a river otter. Big noses, so when they're looking at you, they look very suspicious. They have flattened heads like you see on this guy. They're small ears that are close to their heads, unlike see this beaver. He has those big ears that are sticking way up. And you see these ears are small. They're also very dark and they're very sleek in the water. So this is a slow motion video, and this is really typical of river otters feeding on fish in a pond. Look how graceful they are. And they always do the dolphin thing. They always do the diving thing. You'll often see their long tails entering the water last. This is typical eating. They're grabbing small fish and eating them right in the water. You see that they have those very strong choppers. If you're in the water with a river otter, in the river, especially if there are young around, stay far away from the otters. Try to stay away from them. Otters don't normally attack people. It's very rare. And when it happens, everyone hears about it because it's pretty unusual. But normally they just try to stay away from you. But if you do see a mother and pups, then don't bug them. I love this slow motion video because we can really see their behavior. The final animal that you'll be really surprised to hear does actually get mistaken for an otter. And that is, again, because river otters, raccoons swim as well as river otters, and they swim in the water, and they don't look like otters when they swim, but if they come out of the water and they're totally wet and it's nighttime and you can't see their masks and you can't see very well, you might mistake them. And the reason for that is because river otters lope when they run along the ground. They're very agile on the ground, but they do lope and they look a little bit like raccoons. So again, and here they are, the beautiful subjects of our talk today. This one on the left on the bottom is really typical of otters. They're very curious animals. And if they see you on the bank and you're not too close to them, then they'll periscope their heads up to get a better look at you. And here you can see those whiskers and those sensitive whiskers that help them to hunt. And look at that thick, wide tail there that really locomotes them through the water. Just beautiful, wonderful animals. And here they are on the bank looking all fluffy and beautiful. And that fluffy, thick fur is the reason why they were trapped almost to extinction in many, many areas of the United States. Thankfully, most places have stopped trapping them, although there are plenty of states that still do trap river otters for their fur. But I like this photo because it shows how different they look when they're not wet and sleek. These guys are in the sun, their fur is dried out. They've probably been doing lots of grooming of each other to keep their fur in good shape. And they're chocolate brown on top. And underneath, they've also been rolling around in this dirt here. So their white fronts are a little bit dirty, but normally they're cleaner than that. But that's a very typical out of the water otter look. A little bit about natural history. We're going to run out of time soon, so I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. Otters are born in the spring. Here in California, they're born mid-February to mid-April. And their pups, they usually have 2 to 4 pups. Pups are quite helpless when they're born. They're born in a den, usually above water, because they can't swim when they're born. Their mothers have to teach them to swim. These are mammals who hunt in the water and get around in waterways. So they have to learn how to be really comfortable in water, learn what to eat, where to find it. And all of those things have to happen within a year to a couple of years. What I love, are they agile? Yes. Can they climb cliffs? Yes, they can. And what we're seeing here is a mother up top and her 2 pretty young pups with her helper female. Female otters don't generally hang out with males, but they'll hang out with related females and sometimes with a couple of sets of pups with them as well. Just wanted to show you how completely amphibious river otters are. Again, this is slow motion. There's that lope that can look like a raccoon. There he goes. So reproduction, this is otter mating. And this is actually a surprisingly quiet example of mating otters. Usually the females don't seem very happy about it. They scream, they struggle, they try to get away. It can become a fight. This one looks relatively okay about it. They usually mate for 2 or 3 days at a time, one male with one female. And interestingly enough, they have delayed implantation, which is what a lot of marine mammals have, that where the egg is fertilized during mating, but the egg doesn't implant into the uterus right away. And in river otters, the egg sits in the uterus for about 10 months before it implants, and then they're in active pregnancy for about 2 months, and then they have their young. So this means that 2 weeks after adult females have their young, they go into estrus again. And that's what this mating is. So this female may very well have a bunch of pups back in a den that she has to feed and look after while mating with this male for a couple of days at a time. So it's a rough life, and it's part of the reason that river otters eat so much is because they don't have a lot of fat on their bodies, and they really need to keep eating to keep their energy up. They're very tough animals. So mating happens. And again, females and males don't hang out together very much unless they're actually mating. So lifespan is approximately 10 to 12 years in the wild. It can be up to 20 years in zoos. And they're pretty tough animals, as you've gathered. And I've seen them get better from all kinds of terrible injuries without any help from people, including the one we're watching here, and you'll see in a minute. Look at the hindquarters on this one. See, she's missing a leg, but we've watched that otter we have no idea how it happened, but we've watched her for 2 or 3 years now, and she's totally fine. She hangs out with the other otters in their female social groups with the pups, and she appears to have no trouble doing anything. So that's one tough otter lady. The things that kill them the most that we discover are being hit by cars. They do get hit by cars a lot. They can also get wildlife diseases, but in general, the otters we see are very, very healthy. So let's move on to what otters eat. There's an otter eating its favorite food, fish, and that is a steelhead. So do otters eat trout? You bet they do. If they can catch them, they will eat them. And if they catch a big fish like that, then all the other otters around them are going to be really interested in sharing. One thing otters do not like to share, adults don't really share their food with the pups. Once the pups get big enough, the females chase them off and tell them to go fish for themselves. So fish is what they eat the most of. We did a prey study on our river otters in Point Reyes, and we found they ate lots of carp, lots of mole crabs, lots of green crabs, which are an invasive species. We even found a scat absolutely full of ladybug wings, which was surprising to me. They eat a lot of aquatic insects like this dragonfly nymph as well. So they are carnivores. They're obligate carnivores, meaning they must eat meat and lots of it. And but they're not picky about what kind of meat. They will eat whatever is slowest, easiest to catch, and most plentiful, because they need to eat 20%, 17% of their body weight per day to stay in good shape. So here's an otter with a gull. Very typical shell. They ate my duck. She was very nice about it. So we are going to go backwards for a moment here. Ate the duck. There we go. So they do eat all kinds of birds, and they eat any meats that they can get. We have a lot of videos about river otters and a lot more information on our website and on our YouTube page, which Terrence just put into the chat for you. So take a look at it. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have questions or have an interest in learning more about river otters. Again, on our website, we have a whole lot of resources and information for you. And as we move forward with our FieldScope project, we'll have a lot of information on FieldScope for you as well. So at this point, I am going to turn you over to Dr. Jessica Bean. She's going to take a few minutes to show you how to input a sighting, which we hope you're all going to do as soon as our show is over today. Dr. Bean is a research scientist at University of California, Berkeley, and she's the Director of Outreach and Science for FieldScope. So over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Megan. And it's been so wonderful listening to and reading all of your thoughts and learning about your observations of river otters already. And it's really exciting. So again, my name's Jessica, and it's been great to be here with all of you. And I run a project called FieldScope, which is a community and citizen science platform for collecting and analyzing data. So I won't go into too much detail about what FieldScope is, but please feel free to check out fieldscope.org. And I'm going to send you in the chat right now a link to the page on FieldScope that's specifically about this project, where we're going to collect the information about otters along the Verde. So I just put that in the chat. So this is our homepage. And you can see here that we don't have too much data in there right now for observations. These are all actually test spots. These aren't actually real data. They've been labeled as tests because we're looking for the information that you have about where you're seeing those otters and how you can share those with us. And as Megan said, these data are really important for all sorts of work that we can be doing in understanding and protecting our waterways. So when you go to this page, the first thing you're going to want to do is click the login. So Megan, if you could go forward, please. So in that upper right-hand corner, you're going to click login, and it's going to take you to another page. Megan, click forward, and you're going to want to click create an account. And this is a fairly easy process. It's pretty typical for creating an account on any sort of website. So if you click forward again, so you're just going to make up a username, put in your email, password, and then your name and your organization. And if you just put community member, that's great. You don't need to put any more details than that. And this will allow you to log into FieldScope and actually submit data. So once you have an account, you can log in, and then your email address, this is my email address in the upper right-hand corner, will appear there on the page, on the main page when you look at the project. Which is great. And then what you see is that add data button. And this add data button will then allow you to share those observations, like the ones that you put already in the chat and that you shared with us on this in this session. So we're really excited to start seeing those popping up on the website. So you're going to want to click that add data button and move forward. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to enter your location. Okay, and so I'm going to just walk you through step by step what this looks like. This video will be available to you if you need to go back and look at it again, but also just know that we're here at FieldScope to support you if any questions or issues arise while you're doing this. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find your location, and you can search, for example, Dead Horse Ranch, which we already heard about today, and you could select Dead Horse Ranch in that list on the map. Go forward, Megan, and then it will take you to a spot at Dead Horse Ranch. But the most important thing now is to think about is to zoom in. So next slide, Megan. There's a little plus button in that corner, and you want to zoom in as much as possible so that we really know exactly where you made that observation, where you saw that otter or those otters. So if you zoom in, you can get really, really close, and you can see the specific roads and the specific creeks and streams, right? The waterways where you are making those observations. So you want to get as zoomed in as possible, and you'll notice see that plus sign is grayed out. So you can't zoom in anymore. And so I've zoomed in as much as possible. And so that is the spot that I'm saying where I found that otter. Okay, so then if you scroll down, you'll be asked to just enter the observation date. When did you observe that otter? So you can select that on the calendar. And then the other most important data is indicating how many total otters did you observe? So was it one otter? Was it two otters? There are observations that I know Megan and Terrence have of like 9 to 10 otters, right? So again, being really specific, how many otters do you think you saw? So this is actually the only required information that you need to log on to FieldScope to submit your sighting. And then you can click at the bottom that save observation. However, there's a lot of other really interesting and useful information that you can give us about the otters and what they're doing. And also telling us a little bit about, are you sure that you saw the otter? What time of day was it? Or that what you saw was an otter. And then what time of day did you see that otter? Could you distinguish adults from pups? How many adults, how many pups were there? So again, this is all really useful information for understanding the ecology of these otters in these places. So you can enter information like that, and also really interesting behavioral information. Were they feeding? Were they swimming? What were they feeding on? Were you able to see, were there fish? Were there crayfish? Were there birds? Was it a duck? Right? So these are all really awesome data that you can provide for us, and I'll enter all of that into FieldScope. And you have these little pull down menus to select yes or no. And then the other thing, which Megan already mentioned, that could be really important is submitting those photos or those videos. So you have a place in FieldScope to do that, where they can all live and can be saved. So if you click that little V next to the photos, upside down V next to the photos, you'll see a choose file button. And then you can select your photo file, and you can select multiple photos. So you go forward, Megan. You'll see I just added a test photo, an otter photo. That's one of Megan's. So you can upload these photos, and you can label it, and you can add a description if you want to, but you don't have to. And then you can choose another one if you need it. So again, you can add these data, and then they will show up on this map. If you go to this data tab at the top of the page, which you can see on the home page of the project, you can see that point appear now on the map. And if you and you can also notice that what it says there is my observations all the way to the left on that screen. So if you click over to all observations, you'll be able to also see everyone else's data that they are submitting. And I should say that your names are kept private, no personal information is shared. That's very important to us. We work a lot with students, like younger students, so we're very concerned about privacy. So don't worry about any personal information being shared publicly. That being said, if there's a question about your data, having an account does allow us to go back and contact you and ask you questions about your sighting if that's useful or interesting for the work that we're doing. You can also switch back and forth between the map and the table. You can see all that data in a table, or you can go back to that map view that I just showed you. So again, lots of ways to explore the data and think about the data. And so this gives you a brief overview of how to submit the data. We'll review this again briefly next week if you join us for our second part of this two-part webinar series. And please, please, please reach out with any questions. So if you want to contact us, you can reach us at info@fieldscope. Sorry, I thought that was on that slide. I'm putting it in the chat now. So feel free to email there, but you can also email me directly at jrveen@berkeley.edu. I'm also putting that in the chat if any questions or issues arise while you're submitting your data, because we definitely want to get this data and all of that information that you shared with us into the FieldScope. We're super excited to hear from you. Next slide, Megan. And again, we're really excited about our next session on May 18th, so 1 week from today. We're really going to be exploring the data that we already have about river otters and figuring out what we can do and what we can learn with that data using FieldScope. So it's really all about telling stories and understanding more about where we might be looking for otters in our community. So we really hope you can join us next week for more storytelling and exploring of otter data and observations. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Megan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. I just have to say I'm just more than delighted to work with Jessica and with the Verde River folks and with all of you. And I want to thank you so much for being here. Please do come to next week's presentation. We'll do it all again and we'll learn more and do more. And if you are able to get in there and put a couple sightings in, we'll show them at the next